Oh, the Packers need a wide receiver in the upcoming draft? I mean, I can't even think of a receiver that they could get. None are coming to mind, or any guy who can make a huge difference on the team. Johnny, roll the highlight reel. Grossi Posse Packer Nation, welcome to another episode of Packcast, a podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, I'm kind of wide receiver one, no big deal. Grossi, and today we are going to be breaking down the top 5 draft needs for the Green Bay Packers in the 2025 NFL Draft. That's why I'm not a quarterback, because that just broke. So last week we recapped what the Packers did in free agency, or at least to the point where I was still in the United States. I'm currently in Japan in the future. Again, the future's great. Turns out everything works out. But for the Packers, we're hoping that things work out as we head closer and closer to the NFL draft. And we do this every single year. And for the most part, these positions change. But for this year, I feel like there are still some positions that have been on previous lists, which are, frustrating to say the least. But we're going to break it down and talk about the 5 positions the Packers need, starting off with number 5. And this one is a bit of a toss-up because I feel like you could go a couple different directions here. But I am going to stick with offensive line as my number 5 draft need for the Packers. The other one that I was thinking of, or a potential honorable mention, was to get a strong side linebacker. The only reason why strong side linebacker did not beat out offensive line is because the Packers did just re-sign McDuffie, and on top of that, they just addressed it with Hopper. Now, we'll see if Hopper's going to be able to develop and if McDuffie's going to still be able to maintain that level of play. But for the Packers right now, I don't think it's their most glaring need. And talking about middle linebacker, finally, we don't need to address that. Edgerrin Cooper has been phenomenal, and I cannot wait to see his second year. But here's the reason why number 5 is O-line for the Green Bay Packers as one of their draft needs. The Packers are going to have a little bit more flexibility this draft because they brought in Aaron Banks for a $77 million contract, who's most likely going to be the starting left guard for the Packers. They're going to likely move over Elton Jenkins to center, but again, we'll see what that configuration is going to look like come August in camp. But one, the Packers might actually want to go and draft a dedicated center. And on top of that, as I mentioned in the free agency video, Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker are on the final years of their contract. And so with Zach Tom, I would be absolutely flabbergasted if the Packers did not re-sign him. He's been playing phenomenally well for the Packers. He's one of the most underrated guys on this Packers squad right now. And for Rasheed Walker, he's also played really well for the Packers. I just don't know if the Packers are going to be able to afford both when those contracts are coming up. And on top of that, wide receiver contracts are coming up. We'll see who we're going to re-sign. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the Packers are going to want to get younger there. So while they did go and get Aaron Banks, and they're going to see what the configuration is going to look like for who's going to be starting where, and they did just draft Jordan Morgan, I would not be surprised if at the end of day 2 or early day 3, the Packers decide to go out and get another offensive lineman, either for depth or a dedicated center, depending on what happens with Elton Jenkins. Because as we know with Goody, you can never have too many offensive linemen. He usually does a pretty damn good job at drafting these O-linemen. So offensive line winds up coming in at number 5 for me in terms of draft needs, because you're having impending free agents who may or may not be re-signed. And on top of that, having some flexibility and some depth is never a bad thing. And I think the Packers think the same. Number 4. Looking at defensive line. We could go with some D tackle. We could go with someone right next to Kenny Clark. But the point is, the defensive line could definitely use an upgrade. TJ Slayton, he went off with the Cincinnati Bengals. And while Slayton, a 4th or 5th round draft pick, I always liked Slayton. He never really measured up to what we wanted him to be. And ultimately right now, looking on that D line, you do have Kenny Clark, who did not have his best season last year. You also have Wooden and Devontae Wyatt on that D line as well. Wyatt, of course, a former 1st round draft pick. And while Wyatt, there have been some sparks and things I've really liked in his play, I would not be surprised if the Packers want to go and dress defensive tackle or get another body on that defensive line. And I would not be surprised if they do it with a day 2 pick. Now, looking at the Packers, they have wanted someone next to Kenny Clark forever, and they have taken some swings. We just mentioned Devontae Wyatt. He was a 1st round draft pick. Unfortunately for the Packers, they really have not been able to get a ton of pressure with a 4-man rush, and that has been problematic. We'll talk about edge rushers in a moment, but in terms of the D line, this is a great draft for defensive tackles, and I would not be surprised if the Packers are dipping their toes in that water, whether they're doubling up on the D-line. I don't think there's ever too many guys that you can have in the trenches, whether it's going to be as starters or as depth pieces. And honestly, if you go and draft a guy in day 2, I think they're going to be able to compete as a starter. And so defensive line has been on this list for quite some time. It remains on this list. While it's not my first and foremost concern, because there are some more concerns that are a little bit more of a priority in my opinion, Kenny Clark is getting a little bit older. He's 29 years old, and you got to hope that he's going to have a better season than he did last year. But from Wooden and Wyatt, you need to see an elevation in their play. And if not, the Packers, I would not be surprised if they go and draft one of these defensive linemen, not only from a very good draft class, but just to get a little bit of insurance just in case none of these guys wind up fitting the bill. Number 3, you got wide receiver. Again, Packers, call me. But the Packers, they have a little bit of a wide receiver problem. And I know we did a video years ago and the Devontae Adams contract was going to expire and they weren't going to have any wide receivers on the team. And here we are again. And heading into last season, there was a good amount of optimism with the Packers wide receiver, right? It was a young core unit. All of their contracts were still on their rookie deals. And the potential was basically through the roof as the Packers were able to beat the Cowboys in the playoffs a couple years back. And it was like, oh, damn, this team could be really, really good. Now, fast forward to this past season, the wide receivers, there was a lot to be desired, right? When you're looking at Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, you had some issues with drops. Christian Watson, when he was on the field, statistically made that offense better, but unfortunately, he suffered another major injury, and so because of that, he is going to miss some time. And so while he's jogging on treadmills right now, we don't know when he is going to be back, and so that is going to leave a void. On top of that, Romeo Doubs suffered another serious concussion. We're going to see if that's going to have any impact. And on top of that, a lot of these wide receivers, their rookie contracts are starting to come to an end. And so Packers getting a wide receiver is a top 3 priority, and I think you could even make an argument that maybe it's number 2. I don't think it's number 1, but they do need another wide receiver. They went out and got Mecole Hardman, but as I mentioned in that free agency video, I don't think he is going to really fit that bill. It's a 1-year deal. I can't imagine it's for a lot of money, and it's more of a stopgap and as a returner anyway. And so the Packers, they're going to go out and get a wide receiver in this draft, and I would be floored if they did not. Now, I don't care if they're going to get a round 1 or a round 2 guy, and I would not be surprised if they're going to double dip. And I want to be very clear, I still believe in the potential of guys like Wicks, like Reed, even Christian Watson if he can stay healthy, right? I believe in these guys, and I love Romeo Doubs, but getting a veteran presence in there would not be the worst thing. They were unable to get somebody in free agency, and so because of that, their only chance here is now to go through the draft and develop somebody. I would be floored if by day 2 they are not drafting a wide receiver. And there's plenty of prospects within this draft that they can go after. We'll talk about individual players in the coming weeks. But ultimately for the Packers, not only do you have impending contracts, but the level of play is not where it needs to be. I still believe in a lot of these guys' potentials. You look at Dontavian Wicks and the separation that he can get. You can look at Jaden Reed and his speed, but the Packers do need to go get a field stretcher. They need somebody with reliable hands, and I imagine that this is going to be addressed in this upcoming draft, whether it's in round 1, 2, or hell, maybe they're going to double dip and they're going to go get multiple guys in day 2 and day 3. But the Packers, go get a wide receiver, and if you can't find one in the draft, you know my number. Number 2, you got some good old corners. That's right, cornerback has to be a major need for the Green Bay Packers. Why? Because right now they got Keyshawn Nixon, right, who went from returner to now CB, might even be CB1. You have Carrington Valentine back there, who has definitely been solid. But as we mentioned in the free agency video, Jair Alexander is likely to be gone. And unless those two sides can come together, that is going to be a void that's going to have to get filled. And I mentioned this in the previous video, but I would not be surprised if CB is the position that the Packers go for on night 1 of the 2025 NFL draft. Not only do they need depth there, but on top of that, they need a true CB1 and who's going to be under contract for a long time that they can develop. Jeff Hafley, I think, impressed for the most part in his first year as DC, and giving him a true CB1, I think, could unlock a ton of potential. Yes, they went out and got Nate Hobbs, but you do have some injury concerns, just like you had with Eric Stokes, and so that's a remain to be seen. And hell, if Nate Hobbs could be a solid contributor in that secondary, I feel a lot better about the corner position, but they still need to go and get the guy. So for me, the potential of drafting a CB is very high for either night 1 or night 2. This could be another position where they try and double dip. We mentioned the safety room, that they really revamped that last year. Who knows? Maybe that's this year's project and trying to make that secondary even better. However, I do think there is one position that is a little bit more important as of right now, and that could even help their secondary. And of course, that position is going to be edge rusher. Yes, we need pass rushers. Please, for the love of God, let's talk about it. The Packers' pass rushing win rate last season was 35%, which ranked 26th in the NFL. However, they were top 10 in sacks at number 8, and so that is a good thing. However, they need to get more pressure on the quarterback. You look at Lucas Van Ness, this was a guy who had a ton of athletic ability coming out of college, a lot of excitement. However, he was a very, very raw talent. And honestly, he just hasn't developed these past couple of years as much as you would like to see him, and we're not closing the door on him completely, but the Packers need him to take that next step or they're going to wind up replacing him. You look at Rashawn Gary, who's had some really nice seasons with the Packers, who has wowed the Packers to the point where they gave him a major contract. He needs to step up as well. And I do love you, Rashawn Gary, but this is a desperate area of need. And in terms of where the edge rushers are right now in this draft class, I would not be surprised if this is a night 1 pick as well. Now, the Packers do have a tendency to go get those guys with freakish athletic builds, but if they're super raw talents, you can see on the field that doesn't always translate to success. And so while I would have loved the Packers to go and get an ascending pass rusher who already had some experience under their belt, they did not do that. Trey Hendrickson, who is currently working things out with the Bengals, I don't think they're going to spend the draft capital on him to go and get him. And so because of that, their only course of action is going to be through the draft. And the reason why I'm putting this at number 1 above all the other positions of need is because with a better pass rush, that will automatically make the secondary better. This is a tried and true method. Look at the 49ers and how they beat the Packers all the times in the playoffs. They were constantly getting pressure just with a 4-man rush. And so if the Packers can improve that pressure rate, that is going to force quarterbacks out of the pocket, that's going to get them hit more likely, and that's going to cause them to make mistakes, which is going to make that secondary look even better. And so if they're able to go and get a premium pass rusher in this draft, that is going to make a world of a difference, because if there was anything from Jeff Hafley's defense that wasn't so great, it was the pass rush last season. And so I'm not shaking my head at 8th in sacks last year. That pass rush win rate is really bad, ranking 26. And so that drastically needs to get improved. It'll make the defense as a whole better. So please, Packers, go and draft a pass rusher. And no, Lions, I will not tell you which one we want, because then you're going to take him from me, because I know you need an edge rusher too. So suck it. And so just to recap here, where I think the Packers' 5 biggest draft needs are at edge, CB, wide receiver, defensive lineman, and offensive lineman depth. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you think there's other positions of need, or do you think that there are some that are more of a priority than others? Let me know. You guys find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or Tom Grossi Comedy, all social media, see down below. A big shout and thank you to all the Patreon and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack, go.